order the hearing of the Subcommittee on Competition Policy, Antitrust, and Consumer Rights. If you note, Senator Lee, I sent him a text on the way here. We have votes at 4, so I'm going to start right away. And then I saw him speaking on the floor. So he will be here shortly. His staff graciously gave us the go-ahead to get started, and I know Mike cares a lot about this, and he's going to be here in a few minutes. But because of the votes at 4 and a number of members are going to join us, I wanted to get started. So this hearing examines the proposed transaction to merge two of our nation's largest grocery stores, the chain of Kroger's and Albertsons. I want to thank Senator Lee and his staff for working with us on this important hearing whenever possible. We do things together. We don't agree on everything, as you can imagine, but we've worked very hard to establish a friendship and a civil relationship on this committee, and I think that has been reflected, our bipartisan cooperation, in one of our bills that just advanced in the House regarding a number of things, but one of them is a bill that's very important to Senator Lee and is now headed to the Senate and actually is relevant here, which is about fees when it comes to antitrust cases with the Justice Department and the FTC. Senator Lee's part of the bill is focused on jurisdiction when it comes to tech cases. I raise that because I think it's, one, important we keep working together, and two, there are solutions to some of these issues outside of the hearing that we're having today. As I think everyone here knows, competition policy is an important priority for me, especially in industries that impact us every single day, like groceries. Over the last decade, the grocery industry has become increasingly consolidated, with the top 4 chains now making up more than 2/3 of all grocery sales. A lack of competition in the industry means higher prices and lower quality. And yet this proposed merger, worth over $24 billion, combines the 2 largest grocery store chains in the country. That's Kroger, and the brand names there include, among others, Kroger, Harris Teeter, Fred Meyer. Albertsons, their brands include, among others, Albertsons, Safeway, Shaw's, and Vons. Today, we're here to learn more about the proposed transaction, the status of competition among grocery stores, and the impact that this merger could have on American families. Food prices have been rising for many reasons, and too many Americans are struggling to put affordable, nutritious food on the table. These issues are even worse for our communities in both rural and urban areas, where people often have to travel long distances and have fewer options to get the food that they need. 1/3 of all grocery stores have closed in the last 25 years, leaving over 10% of Americans in areas that lack easy access to fresh food. Going into a drugstore or a gas station or even a fast food place is still not the same as going into a regular grocery store. This has serious implications for health and safety, particularly for the over 6 million American children who don't have enough to eat. Against this backdrop, we look at this proposed $24.6 billion merger. Consider the communities all across the country, like in Florence, Oregon, where your options are to shop at Fred Meyer, owned by Kroger, or at Safeway, owned by Albertsons. These 2 stores have to compete for business, meaning they will offer lower prices, deliver fresher produce, or provide convenient services like curbside pickup. Now, if those 2 stores are operated by the same owner, there's no incentive to compete for customers and prices. They might even close one of the stores, and that, of course, eliminates jobs in these communities. So that's why you have heard concern across the country about this transaction. Now, we have a recent example of the impact of consolidation in the grocery industry. In 2015, Albertsons bought Safeway for over $9 billion, something we discussed over the phone. In order to try to preserve competition in the market, the Federal Trade Commission required the company to sell off more than 150 stores. We all know that this often happens when there's mergers in any industry where there is competitive markets that in the merged company overlap. But what happened here is a pretty sad tale. In less than a year, the grocery chain that bought a majority of these stores filed for bankruptcy. They couldn't compete against the actual Albertsons down the street. And as a result, over 100 of the divested stores were closed for good, and over 8,000 employees were laid off. Albertsons was allowed to buy back 29 of the stores it originally sold at a discount. I have talked to the CEOs about this. I understand they have a different plan for divestment that they have already presented for hundreds of stores, but I think this weighs heavily on the minds of a lot of people who have concerns about this agreement, just looking at the immediate past and what happened. Divesting more than 100 stores did not work last time, and this is triple, quadruple, or even more will be divested if this merger goes through. The companies have said that together they will lower prices. We appreciate that goal and statement, that they will be offering fresher food and they will improve the customer experience. They say that the merger will allow them to better compete with Walmart, which sells about 1/4 of the groceries in America. But even if the proposed merger does result in some of the efficiencies, will it be enough to outweigh the loss of major competitors in hundreds and hundreds of communities across the country? When there's even less competition, will Kroger still be incentivized to pass on cost savings to consumers? These questions must be answered by our witnesses today and also, I'm sure, by the regulators that will be looking at this proposed merger. The proposed transaction also shows, to get back to where I started, why it is important that we have antitrust enforcers who can carefully and thoroughly investigate and enforce the laws. To make sure they can do their job, we need to do our job in Congress by getting them the funding that they need. Our antitrust agencies can't take on the increasing consolidation in our economy, whether it is grocery stores or Ticketmaster, ask the Taylor Swift fans, or in tech with just Band-Aids and duct tape. And this applies to both the review of mergers, the enforcement of consent decrees, and any other provisions and requirements that we believe as a country to ensure competition and to protect capitalism, something that has always been a focus of our economy, that we want to put in place. Right now, Senator Grassley and I, as I mentioned, have the bill to update the merger filing fees that haven't been changed in 20 years. It basically says on big mergers, you have to pay a little more, on small mergers, less, and the net gain would be very helpful to the agencies. This has been supported in the past by Trump appointees, both in the Justice Department and in the FTC, as well as Biden appointees. The bill recently passed the House, as I noted, along with the bill that Senator Lee and I have, and we are going to push very hard to find a path forward on the bill so we can update our competition laws. I just think it is very important to view this hearing for what it is, incredibly important to gather the information from these witnesses that will help the review by the FTC, but it is also equally important for the Congress to start looking at these mergers, not just this one, but all of them and all of the consolidation we're seeing in a bigger light, and realizing these things are going to be bumping up against our consumers every single day. And if we just say, oh, this is too hard, or oh, someone lobbied against this, we are not going to be doing the job that those before us did, whether it was changing the laws way back with Democratic and Republican support for the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act, and the work that was done when it came to the AT&T breakup and the like. So just let this be a warning sign of what's to come if we continue burying our heads in the sand. With that, I want to introduce our witnesses. The first is Mr. McMullen. He is the CEO and chairman of the board at Kroger, where he started his career as a part-time stock clerk in 1978. Very impressive. Mr. Shankaran is the president and CEO of Albertsons Companies, Inc. Prior to that, he served as CEO of PepsiCo Foods North America. And I appreciated both of you talking to me at length about your plans. Next up, Mr. Sharma, who is a senior researcher specializing in competition and antitrust matters at Consumer Reports. Thank you for your good work. It's becoming more and more important as we look at this consolidation in our economy. Professor Sweeting is the department chair and professor of economics at the University of Maryland, College Park. He served as the director of the Bureau of Economics at the Federal Trade Commission in 2020. And then finally, Mr. Needler, who is the president and CEO of Fresh Encounter, Inc., which is an independent grocery retailer headquartered in Ohio. He is a third-generation grocer. So I thank our witnesses, and I'm very pleased that maybe I'll swear them in, and then we will hear from my friend and colleague, Senator Lee. So if the witnesses could now please stand, raise your right hands. Do you swear that the testimony you will give before the subcommittee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you very much. You'll be seated. I'm going to recognize Senator Lee, and then we will hear your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Millions of Americans just gathered for a Thanksgiving meal, one that was more expensive than any other before it, as grocery prices have risen more than 13% just over the last year. Turkeys, in particular, were estimated to be 73% more expensive this year than they were last year. Sadly, many consumers have started reporting that they now have to choose between buying groceries to feed their families and putting gas in their cars to get to work. Inflation, to put it gently, is wreaking havoc on our entire economy. But not on the grocery industry, it appears. In fact, earlier this year, Kroger CEO Rodney McMullen confessed that, quote, "A little bit of inflation is always good in our business," close quote. Well, it must have been very good this year, as Kroger has now amassed enough to spend $24.6 billion to buy up one of its largest competitors, Albertsons. If this feels like deja vu all over again, that's because it is. Back in 2015, Albertsons acquired Safeway for $9.2 billion. As a condition of approving that particular merger, the FTC required Albertsons to divest 168 of its stores. When the largest buyer of the divested stores went bankrupt just 9 months later, not even a full year, Albertsons bought back some of the very same stores that it had been required to give up in order to avoid violating the antitrust laws and in order to allow the merger to go through. Then the FTC official who had signed off on that divestiture now runs the antitrust practice at the law firm representing Kroger in its purchase of Albertsons. Hollywood couldn't write a more cynical plot, not if it tried. Yet the companies assure us that this is the merger that will make everything better. They have announced commitments to spend $500 million to lower prices, $1.3 billion to update their stores, and $1 billion to increase employee wages. Of course, they haven't explained how we can be sure that these commitments will actually be fulfilled. Nor have they explained why the merger is necessary to begin with. In fact, while they've promised $2.8 billion in investments, they've also just announced a $4 billion payout to shareholders. Their press release hints at other motives, including increased data collection and advertising, and a greater focus on ESG. This leaves me wondering, do Americans really need a grocery store chain with wealthier owners who collect more of their personal data and push their woke agenda even more? Not in Utah, that's for sure. In preparation for today's hearing, we attempted to hear Kroger and Albertsons' side of the story, but they largely declined to provide substantive answers or explanations to subcommittee staff and promised instead that they would do so in their testimony. We'll see soon enough. I expect the candor of their testimony will be a good predictor of the fate of this merger. Now, I've been asked more than once what the purpose of a Senate hearing on a merger is when we don't have law enforcement powers in this committee. We're just a legislative subcommittee. Simply put, hearings like this one provide an important opportunity for the American people to better understand an economic transaction over which they have little say, but which so intimately affects their lives and their livelihoods. It also gives us a chance to review the adequacy of our laws protecting competition. That is certainly the case today. I'm grateful to each of the witnesses for joining us, and I look forward to our discussion and to the transparency that I hope we can provide to American consumers today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Lee. Thank you. Please go ahead, Mr. McMullen.
Thank you, Senator. Chair Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, good afternoon. My name is Rodney McMullen, and I am Chair and CEO of Kroger. Thank you for your time today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here alongside Vivek Sharkaran of Albertsons to discuss the compelling benefits of our proposed merger. We know you have questions about the merger's impact. Today, we will share our strong conviction that this merger will enhance competition, lower prices, improve the customer experience, and create investments in our associates, while securing the long-term future of union jobs. I thought I would share just a little bit about me before I talk a little bit more about some of the Kroger insights. I grew up in a union household, and my parents bought a small farm. I began my career, as the senator shared earlier, stocking shelves at a Kroger store in Lexington, Kentucky in 1978. And I would have never imagined to have the job I have today. The grocery industry has changed significantly throughout my career, and Kroger continues to evolve. When I joined Kroger, the average family bought most of their groceries during a weekly trip to their neighborhood store. Today, the industry is larger, more complex, and more competitive, with near endless opportunities and options of where and how to shop. At Kroger, when we discuss competition, we look at where customers are actually shopping for food and eating, today and in the future. Customers purchase food everywhere, from Walmart and Trader Joe's to Costco and Aldi to Dollar General, 7-Eleven, Walgreens, and restaurants, for example. Notably, nearly every competitor I just named is non-union. Today, Kroger ranks fourth in total revenue behind Walmart, Amazon, and Costco, and we compete with these companies to sell groceries. The combined company will remain at number 4. We work every day to deliver the high-quality products and value our customers want. We operate on razor-thin margins. This merger will give us the flexibility, national footprint, and digital capabilities to compete more effectively. Our commitment is to provide fresh, affordable food for everyone. This is especially important today when inflation impacts so many families. We help our customers save money with low everyday prices, personalized promotions, fuel rewards, and best-in-class Our Brands products. And just FYI, Our Brands, a lot of people would call it private label, but we call it Our Brands. This merger will allow us to compete even more. A point I think is especially important is that our business model, this is our fundamental business model, is built around lowering prices to attract more customers rather than making higher margins on fewer customers. Our fundamental strategy is to lower prices, invest in associates and the customer experience, and support our local communities. We've been doing this for years, and when we do these things well, our shareholders benefit. Since 2003, we have invested more than $5 billion to reduce prices annually. We have committed to invest an additional $500 million post-closing in the Albertsons stores. Our associates obviously enable our success, and we are committed to investing in theirs. This ranges from competitive pay and benefits to education, training, and more. Since 2018, Kroger has invested an incremental $1.2 billion in wages and comprehensive benefits, and a total of 25.9% increase. We've committed to invest an additional $1 billion post-closing. This transaction will secure union jobs. Since 2012, we've grown our unionized workforce by more than 100,000. We will not close any stores, distribution centers, or manufacturing facilities, or lay off any frontline associates as a result of this merger. We are equally focused on creating a more sustainable food system through Kroger's Zero Hunger, Zero Waste commitment. Since 2017, we've directed a total of $1.65 billion in food and funds to end hunger, including donating more than 2.3 billion meals. I'm incredibly proud of the impact and look forward to doing even more alongside Albertsons. After closing, our commitments are to lower prices starting day one, continue investing in our associates and stores, and doing even more in our communities than either of us can do alone. Senators, this is what we do at Kroger is truly unique. This merger will allow us to fulfill these commitments to our customers, our associates, and our communities well into the future. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. McMullen. Next up, Mr. Shankaran.
Thank you, Senator. Chairwoman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the subcommittee, my name is Vivek Shankaran, and I'm Albertsons Chief Executive Officer. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today with Rodney McMullen, CEO of Kroger, and to share my views on why Albertsons' proposed merger with Kroger is good for consumers and the communities we serve, why it will result in more competition, not less, and why it will provide our employees with security and create one of the largest private sector union employers in our country. I'm humbled to sit before you. Both my story and the story of Albertsons are American stories. I'm a fortunate immigrant American. I came to the United States in 1986 to earn a master's in engineering from Georgia Tech. While there, I worked in a photocopy shop, my first job in America, where I earned $3.25 per hour, a lot of money for me as a young immigrant. After graduating, I worked as an engineer in factories in rural Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. I then earned an MBA, worked as a consultant, and ultimately ran PepsiCo's North American foods business, including Frito-Lay. And in April of 2019, I was privileged to join Albertsons Companies as CEO. Albertsons is a turnaround story. Only 10 years ago, we were 192 stores. In 2013, we invested in 600 SuperValue stores in danger of closing. In 2015, we acquired Safeway, which was also in decline. We turned those stores around, saved jobs, invested in lowering prices to appeal to more customers, and ensure that these grocery stores could continue to serve their communities. We now have 2,300 thriving stores that provide 290,000 jobs and put fresh food on the tables of our customers. Albertsons and our other banners like Safeway, Shaw's, and Acme have hundreds of years of combined history. Our philosophy is locally great, nationally strong. Albertsons is committed to retaining the rich history of these banners to continue to serve our customers and communities across the country. The proposed merger will help protect the local community grocery stores that people love. Kroger-Albertsons stores will continue to be the staples of their local communities, the places where teenagers have their first jobs, kids pick out a special birthday cake from the baker, the longtime cashiers, florists, and butchers know customers by name and work for decades at our stores with good pay and benefits to provide for their own families. To understand why we at Albertsons believe a merger will help us continue to thrive in local communities, I want to reiterate what Mr. McMullen described in his testimony. The marketplace for groceries over the past decade has completely transformed, making the competition for consumers fierce. The best way to compete with mega stores like Walmart and highly capitalized online companies like Amazon will be through a merger with Kroger. And even after this merger, Walmart, Costco, and Amazon will have nearly 3 times the share of grocery sales as Kroger and Albertsons combined. Finally, I would like to endorse what Mr. McMullen stated in his testimony regarding the benefits of the proposed Kroger-Albertsons merger. And I'd like to add that this transaction is good for Albertsons' loyal customers, employees, and communities. First, our customers come to our stores to get quality products at a fair price, and I'm confident that this merger will help us do even better. For example, at Albertsons, we invest in manufacturers, transporters, and farmers to ensure that we have a stable supply chain. And this merger will allow us to provide more volume stability so manufacturers and farmers can have the certainty to invest in assets, plant production, and plant crops, reducing supply chain costs for consumers. This merger will also benefit Albertsons employees. Albertsons has a rich history of creating jobs, adding nearly 20,000 jobs over the last 5 years, while maintaining a productive and positive relationship with our employees and their unions. The combined company will be the largest private sector union retailer in the country and provide our employees with greater opportunities and options as we compete with non-union companies like Amazon and Walmart. The merger is also a win for the communities Albertsons serves. Albertsons has a long history of caring for our local communities. Over the last 10 years, Albertsons has contributed over $1.5 billion to fight hunger in our communities. We serve remote and underserved communities across this country, from rural towns in Alaska and Montana to urban neighborhoods with the need for fresh food, from Los Angeles to Chicago to Newark. The merger will further solidify our presence into the future. Thank you again for the invitation to come before you today. I look forward to answering your questions.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Sharma.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and subcommittee members. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of Consumer Reports. Consumer Reports was founded 85 years ago as part of a mission to work for a marketplace that is fair and just for all. We have emphasized the fundamental importance of competition to ensure that the market works for everyone. Kroger and Albertsons claim that this merger will benefit consumers. We are not convinced. I'll make 3 main points in my remarks. The first, the transaction will result in less competition, which will be bad for consumers. The proposal is to merge the first and second biggest supermarkets in a sector that's already consolidated. And the supermarket is the right framework to consider for the proposed transaction. In 2015, when the FTC considered the Albertsons Safeway, found that the relevant markets where consumers can substantially all of their weekly food and grocery shopping requirements in a single shopping visit. This is not true of a CVS or a Dollar General or a restaurant, for example. Also, when consumers are asked, where do you regularly buy food and products for everyday use? 72% respond the supermarket. So when you consider where the competitive constraints which motivate these businesses to be responsive to consumers' interests come from, it's mainly other supermarkets. And importantly, Kroger and Albertsons compete head-to-head and impose this competitive constraint discipline on each other. Kroger's 2021 fact book lists Albertsons as one of its main competitors in 5 out of 10 of Kroger's top markets, covering a total of 546 Kroger stores. Of its 49 top markets, Albertsons is listed as one of the main competitors in 14, covering 814 Kroger stores. Another example of this competitive dynamic is that compared to other retail chains, Kroger and Albertsons have a higher percentage of product promotions on discounts. Use these incentives, no longer face competition from Albertsons. The consolidation will also reduce to consumers. Their combined R brands portfolio will become one of the largest in the US. My second point, the claimed benefits of the merger are uncertain, and it is unclear if these will benefit consumers. First, Albertsons and Kroger acknowledge the uncertain nature of any benefits of the proposed transaction in their own merger investor presentation. This is understandable given the complexity of integrating and rationalizing different fulfillment systems, store brand product portfolios, etc. Second, Kroger states that the deal accelerates Kroger's go-to-market strategy. This may be good for Kroger, but it is not a benefit from the merger for consumers. For example, Kroger recently launched Boost, its loyalty program nationwide, announced the opening of 11 central fulfillment centers, and opened 17 fuel locations. So the acquisition of more fulfillment centers of fuel locations via the proposed transaction is not a merger-specific efficiency which will incentivize Kroger to improve competition. It is investing in the... Another claim is that Kroger will be able to better personalize and loyalty programs after the merger. But again, it is something it's already doing. Finally, even if there are some efficiencies that are merger-specific, these cost savings are unlikely to be passed on to consumers. Why would any of those savings be shared with consumers unless competition incentivizes these companies to do so? These are, after all, profit-maximizing corporations. My third point. Even if the party sells some stores, this is unlikely to preserve competition. The details of any divestiture that the parties propose are known. The number of stores, whether these stores will be in proximity so that they can form a regional chain, or whether the divested stores will have all the business elements required to operate independently. But the logic of any divestiture in this instance is strange. The deal rationale given by the parties, which we dispute, is that it will allow them to be more competitive in the market by growing their store footprint, increasing the number of fulfillment centers, growing their store brands portfolio, and the ability to analyze more data. Yet the divested company will have less of each. How is supermarket deal rationale is to be believed? More generally, emerging parties have incentives to make sure that the purchaser of divested assets is not an effective competitor. This is illustrated, in our view, by the failed divestment of the 168 stores that the FTC required when Albertsons and Safeway merged. To conclude, then, we are skeptical that the benefits of the deal, as claimed by the parties, will be realized. The most likely outcome of this merger between the two largest supermarket chains will be to significantly lessen competition, lead to higher prices, fewer choices, and worse supermarket and grocery access for consumers in some neighborhoods. Thank you again for the opportunity for speaking with you, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma. Professor Sweeting.
Chair Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, I am honored to testify today and look forward to participating in the discussion. In 2020, I served as Director of the Bureau of Economics at the FTC. In that position, I oversaw economic analysis of horizontal mergers, including in retail, and I advised the Commission when it was making enforcement decisions. While I think that agencies take broadly the right approach to analyzing mergers, it is important to always learn from past experiences and from what other agencies are doing. This is one reason why I was proud to be involved in revamping the FTC's merger retrospective program, which tries to promote exactly these types of learning. Grocery merger retrospectives have found that prices have risen after some mergers, especially in markets that were already concentrated, but that some mergers have lowered prices, suggesting possible efficiencies. Today, I want to make a few comments about what we can learn from the FTC's retrospective analysis of its own merger remedies, and also from the UK Competition and Markets Authority's 2019 inquiry into the proposed merger between Asda and Sainsbury's, chains that operated over 2,000 stores across the UK. So when I suggest how these lessons may apply to Kroger and Albertsons, I should be clear that my knowledge of this transaction comes only from what I have read in the press. Economics predicts that after a horizontal merger, the incentives of the merged firm to raise prices will depend on the degree of diversion between the merging chains. In this setting, suppose that my local Safeway, owned by Albertsons, raised its prices. Some Safeway consumers would switch to other supermarkets, and the relevant diversion would be the proportion of these switching consumers who would choose to go to nearby Kroger stores rather than, for example, Giant, Aldi, or Walmart. To take an enforcement decision or design a divestiture, agency economists have to assess anti-competitive incentives, and this requires estimating diversion. My first comment relates to how diversion is estimated. In some settings, existing market share data can be useful, and in grocery, sometimes loyalty card data or firm documents can also tell you where else a chain's consumers also shop. However, these measures can sometimes be misleading guides to post-merger diversion. For example, I visit both Safeway and Whole Foods, but this does not necessarily mean I would switch to more of my spending to Whole Foods rather than to Kroger if Safeway prices increased. The UK CMA has been a pioneer in its use of consumer-level surveys to accurately measure likely diversion after mergers. Its Asda Sainsbury's inquiry used over 20,000 store exit interviews to calculate diversion and local competitive effects. These interviews were particularly useful in assessing substitution to chains with different formats, such as Aldi and Lidl. A survey of 30,000 online customers was used to define markets and calculate diversion for the online delivery channel. In my experience, the US agencies rarely use surveys. This is partly a question of the time, expertise, and money required to commission and interpret surveys, and potentially to hire experts who could testify to their accuracy in court. This transaction illustrates why it is so important that the agencies get the resources they need to build expertise using new tools that could guide better enforcement decisions. The CMA also suggested that different competitive effects may be present in the online channel. For traditional in-store grocery, there are so many prices that coordination may be viewed as unlikely. But the CMA believed that delivery charges and the types of time slots that consumers are able to choose are highly visible and important strategic choices, and that an Asda Sainsbury's merger might have made coordination on these terms more likely. And I expect the FTC staff will be looking carefully at whether similar issues arise in the US. My final comment is on the design of any divestiture package. In 2017, the FTC published a retrospective study of the remedies imposed in prior cases. An important finding was that divestitures are much more likely to maintain the pre-merger level of competition when an ongoing business is divested, rather than a more limited set of assets that might require continuing dependence on other firms. In the current case, this suggests an appropriate divestiture may not only involve the divestment of stores, where the merger might reduce local competition, but also distribution centers, trademarks, and manufacturing plants for private label products, and a set of digital assets, possibly including data. The evaluation of any divestiture package should also account for the fact that the success of any new business is uncertain and the degree of risk to be borne by customers should be small.
Thank you very much, Professor Sweeting. Next up, Mr. Needler.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Klobuchar, Ranking Member Lee, and members of the Antitrust Subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify. My name is Michael Needler, Jr. I'm the president and CEO of Fresh Encounter, an independent retail grocery chain based in Northwest Ohio. I'm testifying on behalf of the National Grocers Association. I operate 100 grocery stores in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and Florida. I'm a third-generation grocer, and I, too, Rodney, started as a bagger. My grandfather started the business in 1964, and I acquired the company from my father a few years ago. Our business serves markets ranging from rural communities to inner-city neighborhoods. In some cases, we're the only full-service grocery in that community. When I took over the leadership of our business, I had about 25 stores, and we faced difficult decisions as we confronted extreme margin pressures and eroding sales. I determined that the only way to survive was to scale up, similar to the strategy that Alberts took and Vivek described. I took a big risk, and we were able to double and triple the size of our business after 4 acquisitions of struggling companies. With each transaction, our size and our sophistication grew. I'm not opposed to enterprising growth, and frankly, I'm agnostic about the proposed transaction that we discussed today, as these are 2 very fine companies that could see great benefit from one another, just as I did with each one of my acquisitions, and it helped me further delight my customer. However, I am concerned that if guardrails are not in place, long-term competition and thus consumers could be harmed. Our view is this: America's grocery sector is getting less competitive from increasing concentration and unchecked buyer power due to a lack of enforcement of the Robinson-Patman Act. On a daily basis, dominant retail chains force suppliers to choose between a level playing field and discrimination against independent grocers who have no legal recourse. Although these problems are not new, grocery power buyers have entrenched their dominance in the pandemic era as supply chains broke down and inflation took hold. In the early part of the pandemic, independent grocers like me struggled to stock must-have products. Meanwhile, the largest national chains demanded on-time, complete orders by threatening suppliers with steep penalties. As inflation surged, independent grocers experienced faster acceleration of wholesale costs relative to retail pricing at larger competitors, creating even deeper margin compression. In the midst of this disruption, the news of Kroger-Albertsons merger was not surprising to me. The reason for the economic realities I just described and the reason for the merger announcement can be boiled into two words: buyer power. This is evidenced by the argument Kroger keeps repeating that the merger will enable it to compete with large players like Walmart and Amazon. But what does that really mean? Members of this subcommittee know better than anybody that the capacity of Amazon to discriminate against third-party sellers and engage in successful predatory pricing campaigns. This behavior isn't unique to big tech. For years, we've seen large competitors use buyer power over grocery suppliers to get superior terms and to force discrimination against competitors. Likewise, countless grocers have been put out of business in areas where we now consider food deserts through successful predatory pricing campaigns. In many of my markets, my customers continuously get coupons for free groceries from large competitors. And I don't know any other way to point out predatory pricing than buying your competition's customers with coupons for free groceries until they're out of business. With the merger of Kroger and Albertsons, what we fear is the creation of another power buyer like Walmart, where the combined firm gains significant more leverage over suppliers. What this really means is that they'll be able to extract funds from our suppliers at our expense. Let me say it again. We're agnostic on the transaction. We are not afraid to compete against anyone, no matter how big. But what we do oppose is the lack of constraints on buyer power, which thwarts our ability to compete on price. Over 80 years ago, Congress wrote Robinson-Patman Act to prohibit economic discrimination against independent businesses. Those laws are still in the books, but the FTC and DOJ have not brought any case in over 20 years. This failure is especially evident across rural American towns that have lost grocery stores. It's time to dust off these tools, protect the free market, our food supply, and the American consumer. The RPA must be enforced or revived through legislation to limit the damage that large firms are inflicting on the competition. Secondly, should a merger be approved, the divestitures must consider the broad economic realities of grocery retailing in today's economy. We must learn from the failure of Safeway and Albertsons, meaning that the FTC must use a microscope on a market-by-market basis down to the street corner to ensure that the combination doesn't harm consumers or leave communities vulnerable. Divestitures should give capable local operators the chance to buy these divested assets. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any of your questions.
Thank you for your thoughtful testimony, Mr. Needler. Just to back you up, Antitrust Division at the Department of Justice has 350 fewer employees today than it did in 1979. FTC is only 2/3 of the size it was in 1980. It's not the only reason some of this is happening, but it's one of them, and a major one. With that, Senator Lee has to go to the floor, so I'm going to allow him to go first with his questions. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kroger has made public commitments to spend billions of dollars to lower prices, to improve its stores, and to raise wages. And those, of course, are just words. It's actions that matter. Mr. McMullen, I'd like to start with you. Now, Kroger announced a $1 billion stock buyback at the end of last year, at the end of 2021. This is consumers were suffering from record inflation and skyrocketing grocery store prices. Things have gotten considerably worse since then compared to food costs in January of 2021, just the beginning of last year. The average U.S. household paid an additional $110 for food in the month of October of 2022. The average Utah household paid an additional $125 in October of 2022, so it's even worse in Utah. If Kroger wasn't passing on savings to consumers when it was competing with Albertsons, because competition very often is what brings down prices. It's one of the few things that can be counter-inflationary. When you've got people competing against each other, it tends to bring down price and enhance quality. Then why would we think it would pass on savings after it eliminates that competition?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. The commitment that we've made as a company, and if you look at our track record, would support that. We've lowered our pricing by over 3% if you look at since 2003, and on an annual basis, that works out to $5 billion per year. If you look at our merger with Harris Teeter, we've lowered our gross profit rate to more than $100 million per year there. If you look at our merger with Roundy's in Wisconsin, we've also lowered pricing there by about $130 million per year. So it's really, when you look at our fundamental model, what we have found is increasing and lowering pricing relative to any of our competitors. And I define competition pretty broad, so Walmart would obviously be our largest competitor, Costco would be number 2, and et cetera. We continually, what we have found is by giving customers a better value, using personalized pricing for each household based on what's really important to that household and passing those savings, that creates more loyalty. And then we also really focus on fresh foods. And that's really, from a competitive standpoint, we always try to make sure that we have the freshest product in the market so it will last longer for the customer when they get it home.
These commitments that you're describing, price-wise and otherwise, are those binding commitments?
They're legal. From a legal standpoint, sir, I don't know the answer to that, but from a business standpoint, that is our commitment.
Right.
And absolutely.
I can't imagine that they would be binding unless it were built into a condition of the approval. Mr. Sankaran, Albertsons just proposed handing out $4 billion to its shareholders, which dwarfs the $2.8 billion in commitments tied to the merger. Why do Kroger and Albertsons need to merge in order to lower their prices and treat their employees better when it seems like they already have the money to do so now?
Thank you, Senator. Regarding the dividend, I know there's been a lot of interest on it. I want to re-emphasize a couple of things. First is the Albertsons companies is in excellent financial condition, and that was the case before the dividend payment and will remain the case after the dividend payment. And we are in an excellent financial condition because over the last several years, as I mentioned in my opening statement, the Albertsons companies has bought a number of distressed stores, 400 stores from Super Value, subsequently the Safeway stores, turned stores around by investing over that time frame $11.5 billion into turning around those stores, an additional $1.5 billion into the communities that we operate in, and in every year since the merger of Safeway, increasing wages, and at the same time becoming more competitive. We had not returned cash to shareholders over that time frame, and this $4 billion is a return of cash to those shareholders who have supported us over this decade, and has nothing to do with the merger itself.
I want to revisit Albertsons' purchase of Safeway, the transaction I mentioned in my opening remarks. I don't think it's controversial to say that when divested assets required to be divested in connection with the merger head to bankruptcy in less than a year, just 9 months, and then end up simply being reacquired by the merged firm, that remedy is an embarrassing failure. You have any response to that?
Senator, the divested stores and the buyer were both at that time qualified, approved by the FTC. We did everything we could to help the Hagen stores at that time, and when it didn't work, we bought it. But if you step back and look at the bigger picture, the merger, by any measure, is a success, where we put two companies together, one of them struggling, and have turned them around, and we're sitting at the table with the financial performance we have because of that merger.
Can I ask one more very quick Mr. McMullen, my time's about out. With personalized pricing, does that just mean they charge different prices to different consumers? And isn't that all you mean by that, the personalized pricing?
No, personalized pricing would be what's most important to that household. So if it's a customer on a budget, they're much more focused on entry price point items, so you would identify items that are most interested for that customer. So it's really looking at each household, what's important to them, and personalizing offers for that particular household.
Okay, I see my time's expired. Thanks.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm going to follow up on one of Senator Lee's questions that he asked you, Mr. McMullen, about the price cut promises and the like. What is the timetable for implementing the price cuts if this merger will be approved, and who will analyze whether or not you meet that commitment?
It will start day one. Obviously, we're not able to do any of the analysis before we merge because of the information that's involved, but it will start immediately on day one, and we would expect that the $500 million to be over a 4-year time horizon as well.
Okay, so, I think one of the reasons you see some cynicism up here about these price reductions is that we've seen increasing consolidation in the grocery market, and we've seen, as you know, consumers for a variety of factors, but we believe one of them is consolidation. If you look at the history of this country and what happens when you have consolidated markets, is consolidation. With reduced competition, even more reduced competition in the grocery store market, won't Kroger feel less competitive pressure to keep prices low? And we're basing this in part on the comment that Senator Lee repeated, where you said that with regard to inflation, you've been very comfortable with our ability to pass on the increases that we've seen at this point. And your operating profit increased from $2.8 billion in 2020 to $3.5 billion in 2021. That's a 25% jump. And so that is why you're sensing some cynicism about this idea about bringing prices down when we have even less competition. So do you want to respond to that?
Yes, Senator, thank you for the question and the directness of the question as well. In terms of part of what I want to share is the things that we've done in the past several years. One of the things in retail, you have to reinvent yourself every 10 to 12 years because you have new competitors come in. And at one point that was Walmart, at another point that was Costco, at one point that's Amazon. And that's just part of the industry. Part of that reinvention is always being making sure the customer gets a better value for their money. And the customer defines value as a combination of price and quality and the service and friendliness of we call employees, associates. And about 20 years when we embarked upon that strategy where we fundamentally changed how we went to market, it's been incredibly successful because we've been able to increase the number of households that are loyal to us, that come to us and shop every day. And we do that by lowering their pricing every day. Our gross profit rate, as I mentioned before, is down over 3% over that period of time. And
okay, but I was asking you about going forward, because I have to get on to some other questions. If you think that having less competition is going to create pressure on you to reduce prices.
Yeah, I just don't see less competition going forward. And I believe, it's easy for a customer to take a right turn or a left turn. And we will continue to invest in pricing because it's incredibly important to our customer. We'll also invest in service and fresh product.
Well, in your own published report, if I could just get a little more focused here, that's the Kroger Fact Book for 2021. It lists 49 major markets where you have 9 or more stores in a city, and it says that you have the number 1 or 2 market share in 41 of the 49 markets already today, and that's without even accounting for the Albertsons stores. Looking just at full-service grocery stores for a moment, not gas station stores, not ones where you can just pick up a few things, but stores that have produce, that have fish, that have butchers. What is your market share today? And do you think, just as you've done here with your own fact book, do you think that you should be considering market share on a market-by-market basis instead of a nationwide basis?
We would look at market share in both both areas, and we always have, because from a local basis, looking at market share, the infrastructure that from a warehouse, some of the other parts are incredibly important to create efficiency. So we would always look at market share from both perspectives, and when we're talking to our board at our business plan meeting, we would be looking at it as well.
I'm going to ask Mr. Sharma and Professor Sweeting about this. When you look at market share, should we look at shares of revenue nationwide or a market-by-market basis when it comes to a competitive analysis? Is it where you live and where you shop, or is it let's look at the whole nation?
Because consumers choose their grocery store from what's available to them locally, the fundamental building block of any competitive analysis is going to be kind of local market structure and local market shares.
Mr. Sharma?
Let me just zoom out and say, make an analogy here. Say, we compete with China as a country, and that's why we probably passed the CHIPS Act. We can also argue you compete with Ecuador or Portugal, and those are competitors in some sense, but that's not what drives policy. And I believe a similar thing is true of companies. You got to look at who is imposing pricing constraint and who. And as you mentioned, in the same 2021 fact book, Kroger lists Albertsons as one of its main competitors in many of these markets in over 800 stores. So I think that should be an important focus. Those main markets should be an important focus of competition.
Mr. Needler, you've done well. You're a strong competitor out there, up against a lot with these chain stores. When you look at your market position, do you look at it at a national level or in your own market?
Yeah, look, so we think in terms of, if you were to look at this in terms of two lenses, pricing and buying, market share for us, we think customer to customer, church to church, corner to corner. How many Little League teams have we been able to sponsor this year? But so I think when you break down market share, the pricing power comes through a local basis, but when you look at it on a national basis, that's where they really accelerate their buyer power on the CPGs. So when they're that big, they become a very big market concern for CPGs. And you look at like some of these major publicly traded companies that list in their public filings, a big risk is concentration of customers, where if you say, pick XYZ brand is only 0.5% of Walmart sales, but 40% of the CPG sales, who's got that power, right? So, creating this environment where they have such a large national basis, that's where the market share becomes relevant from a buying perspective, but not necessarily on a consumer basis.
Thank you, Mr. Needler, for your practical advice. Last question, Mr. Shankaran. When Albertsons brought Safeway, we talked about that. It divested more than 150 stores. We talked about the kind of tragic end of that with the company that bought him facing bankruptcy. With the recent, or in bankruptcy, a lot of the stores failed. With that recent history of failed divestitures, why should we have faith that divesting stores would work now?
Senator, the divestitures are in those markets where some others have mentioned, the witnesses have mentioned that there is some overlap. There's two ways we're planning this. One is divestitures that would go to credible buyers, once again determined by the FTC, qualified buyers who have the capacity and capability to take these stores and add to their franchise. And second, we have also conceptualized the notion of a SpinCo. The SpinCo will be owned by the current shareholders of Albertsons companies, the current board of the Albertsons companies. It'll have equity value, and the SpinCo will, and this is a group of leaders that have experience in having started with a 192 chain store in the past and built it to the company we are today.
Okay, very good. We're going next to Senator Padilla, then to Senator Cotton, I believe. So, and we also, Senator Hawley is here as well as Senator Blackburn. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we've heard today, Kroger and Albertsons seek to emerge at a time when hardworking families face rising prices at the grocery stores. This deal has a particularly large footprint in the state of California, where the two companies operate close to 900 stores. And so, needless to say, I am acutely aware and concerned about this merger. I'm concerned my constituents will experience higher prices, new food deserts, and reduced access to nutritious meals. And I'm concerned that our grocery workers risk lost jobs, reduced benefits, and suppressed wages. And these concerns are nothing new. In fact, when I was a member of the Los Angeles City Council some years ago, I authored an ordinance that limited the ability of new grocery store owners to lay off the former owner's grocery workers for 3 months. This was meant to protect the health and safety of consumers by ensuring that stores maintained an experienced and trained staff. You better believe that ordinance was challenged in court, was upheld, and is now state law in California. Now, with that being said, my first question is to both Mr. McMullen and Mr. Shankran. From what I could find in the city of Rancho Cucamonga, California, there are currently 11 retail grocery stores, 9 of which are owned by Kroger or Albertsons. In the community of San Pedro, part of Los Angeles, they have 5 retail grocery stores and 4 are operated by Albertsons or Kroger. I can point to many other communities up and down the state of California where my constituents will have clearly fewer retail grocery store options if this merger goes through. So in this particular market, competition is absolutely local, and fewer local options means less competition to keep prices low. Now, in your testimony, you both suggest that your stores compete with premium stores like Whole Foods and Sprouts, or warehouse stores like Costco, or expensive online grocery delivery services. But from my experience, consumers know better. Replacing the neighborhood grocery store with premium alternatives means a consumer would face a dramatic increase in the price of their basic staples, and likely the number of stops they would now need to make to buy what they need. So the question for both of you, I trust you know the profile of the consumers who shop at your stores. Do you really believe that your customers could easily substitute all the shopping that they do at your stores with shopping at Whole Foods or Costco or on Amazon?
Senator, thank you for the question. When we talk to our customers, they typically tell us they shop at 5 or 6 different locations. And it's really what they need at that particular point in terms of convenience, ease, size of shop. So what we find is customers engage shopping at multiple different locations. In terms of the other part of your question, obviously, we are actively working with the FTC, and we will expect to continue to do that, and would expect that every market will be just as competitive going forward as it is today.
Senator, I would reinforce what Mr. McMullen said about consumers shopping multiple different stores, Walmarts, Targets, Whole Foods, our store, drugstores, and dollar stores, all at the same time to finish their basket on a weekly basis. I would also re-emphasize, Senator, that the intent is not to close stores. The intent is to divest stores, working with the FTC, so that those stores in those markets where we might have greater overlap will have more divested stores to an owner that we want to ensure is a viable competitor going forward.
Yeah. Well, I have separate questions and concerns about the divestiture component of all of this, not just speculative, but based on past experience with specifically grocery companies, mergers, and consolidations. I know my time is limited, so I have to follow up with those questions. I do want to make one comment just in response to your comment about, well, customers are already shopping around. I'll tell you why they shop around, because I do the same. You're shopping around chasing what's a better price at which other store. And so that's the concern. With less competition, prices go up, making it harder to make your ends meet. So consumers are already experiencing this, whether it's fruits and vegetables here, meat over there, you get the picture. I do want to make sure I ask this question here before my next colleague begins their statements and questions. A merger between Albertsons and Kroger will directly impact their combined workforce of more than 710,000 associates. Nearly 100,000 of those associates are in California. The proposed merger announcement noted that the combined company expects to invest $1 billion to continue raising associate wages and comprehensive benefits after close. That's a quote. So, Mr. McMullen, I'd welcome more detail about the $1 billion investment, what it will look like in practice. For example, is this a $1 billion immediate investment, or is it spread out over 10 years? Is it going towards salary, health benefits, pension, all the above? What does it mean for take-home pay for workers after the proposed merger?
Thank you, Senator. We would expect it to be over a 4-year period of time, and it'll be a combination of pay and benefits. And if you look at what we've actually done, it's been a combination of both. If you look at the benefits that we offer, it would be world-class across the U.S. in terms of retirement benefits, other health care benefits, and things like that. And we would expect to continue to do that, which many of our non-union competitors would not offer to the same degree.
Okay, and a question for both of you again. Just briefly, my time is up. How are you communicating this with the labor representatives, with the unions representing the associates today?
Senator, we just had a discussion with the leadership of the union. We continue to discuss this with them. These are early days, and they're learning the benefits of what we believe exist in this merger, and we've begun those discussions, Senator.
Okay. Well, I don't know how early these days are. It's been in the news for weeks. There's, in addition to the merger, news about dividends that we can get into later as well. So the sooner communication happens, the more thorough and transparent communication happens, the better. I now recognize Senator Cotton for his questions.
Thank you. Mr. McMullen, I want to address Kroger's workforce practices and specifically how you accommodate or how you treat requests for accommodation. Let's suppose hypothetically that Kroger had a vegan worker with strong ethical beliefs about animal welfare. If she requested to work outside, say, the butcher department and instead in the produce department, would Kroger accommodate that request?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And it's one of the nice things about one of our retail stores. There's many different areas, and we routinely have people transferring between departments. Some of that is just personal interest. Some of that is to grow in their own personal career. And if you look at our store directors, 70% of our store directors started out as an hourly associate. So it's easy to accommodate somebody, and that accommodation is really based on their own desires and their own interests.
Would you make such accommodations based on their Christian beliefs as well?
We would not get involved in terms of religious beliefs.
Okay, the reason I ask is that you recently agreed to pay $180,000 to settle a religious discrimination case in Conway, Arkansas. In that case, two Kroger employees, Brenda Lawson, age 72, and Trudy Rickard, age 57, declined the directive to begin wearing a new store apron with a multicolored heart symbol on it. They, like many other of your employees, felt uncomfortable with the new aprons because they thought the heart resembled a gay pride symbol. Rather than make accommodations, Kroger fired these two employees. One employee simply asked to cover the symbol with a name tag, but Kroger refused even that reasonable accommodation. Are you aware of these terminations, Mr. McMullen?
Senator, I am not.
This was not a private lawsuit either by two disgruntled employees, Mr. Mullen. This was brought by the EEOC. So are you not aware when your company is sued for religious discrimination by the United States government?
No, sir, I am not. Not always.
Well, I'm disappointed by that. Are you aware that, Mr. McMullen, are you aware that Kroger has something called an allyship guide for its employees?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. In the allyship guide, you direct employees to stop using sir and ma'am because they're not inclusive. Do you expect 72-year-old employees in rural areas of Arkansas to really stop using words like sir and ma'am?
If you look at our allyship guide overall, it's trying to support our associates in going forward and trying to be inclusive for everybody with all different beliefs. And when you look at our associate resource group, our associate resource groups were created several years ago for people with different types of interests. And we think it's incredibly important to be an inclusive, opening culture to welcome all associates.
If employees in your stores in rural Arkansas refer to other employees or customers as sir or ma'am, do they face disciplinary action?
Not that I'm aware of, sir. I would have to ask.
Are you still requiring employees to wear the apron with the rainbow heart symbol on it?
Yeah, if you look at this, we put in place an apron several years ago because our associates wanted to have a common dress code. The heart is the symbol of art. The Kroger's fundamental purpose is to feed the human spirit. And part of feeding the human spirit is the heart. And that heart is our fundamental strategy to support our purpose. The colors were not tied to any specific thing.
Well, I'm not sure I believe that because it was introduced during Pride Month as a supposed sign of inclusivity, and a federal judge didn't agree with it either. That's why he rejected your company's motion for summary judgment, and you just paid $180,000 to two employees that you wrongly terminated. By the way, would you like to offer an apology here to Brenda Lawson and Trudy Rickard for the ordeal they went through?
I would need to understand more of the details, Senator. Thank you.
Okay. So is it the case that you are still requiring all employees without accommodation to wear this apron with the rainbow heart?
If you look at our apron would be required for all associates to wear consistently across the company.
Does it or does it not still include the symbol for which you just paid $180,000 to settle an EEOC lawsuit against your company?
It would include a heart on it, Senator.
And having settled that lawsuit, are you now going to grant accommodations to employees who don't wish to display a symbol that they may perceive as not aligned with their moral and Christian views?
Senator, I will thank you for the question. I will need to follow back up with our team with more of the details.
If this merger goes through, who's going to be making decisions about uniforms in the combined company and whether to grant reasonable accommodations?
If you look in terms of our fundamental uniform that was put in place, our associate resource groups work together in terms of designing the uniform, and we would use the same type of approach on a combined company basis.
Okay. This situation reminds me a little bit of the situation big tech companies have found themselves in recent years. They've come to Washington because they fear regulation from our Democratic friends or action by the Biden administration, and they expect Republicans, who are traditionally more supportive of free enterprise, to come to their defense. And I've cautioned them for years that if they silence conservatives and center-right voters across the country, if they discriminate against them in their company, they probably shouldn't come and ask Republican senators to carry the water for them whenever our Democratic friends want to regulate them or block their mergers. So I've heard a lot of questioning about that today, and I've read a lot about it in the news. And I'll say this: I'm sorry that's happening to you. Best of luck.
I believe that I have the gavel in.
Senator Blumenthal is recognized to question and take the gavel.
As one of your Democratic friends. In Senator Klobuchar's absence, I will ask some questions and then pass it to Senator Durbin if she hasn't returned in the meantime. Let me ask you, Mr. McMullen, when Kroger and Albertsons announced the merger on October 14th, I think it was, you said, I think you were quoted correctly as saying, importantly, the merger secures union jobs, and we will continue to work with local unions across America to serve our community. Both Kroger's and Albertsons stores have unionized workforces, according to the UFCW International. More than half of Kroger stores and a majority of Albertsons stores are members, and yet multiple unions have said they're opposed to this transaction, particularly expressing their concern over the possibility of closures. So my question to you is, how do you plan to secure, and will you commit to secure, jobs and work with local unions?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And as Mr. Shakaran mentioned earlier, we are in active conversations with the unions, both UFCW and Teamsters. We view the unions across the U.S. are incredibly important partners, and we will work together with the unions. Obviously, a successful business in terms of taking care of customers is what provides job security. And what we find is our associates are the main ingredients of creating that connection. And it's an incredibly important relationship because customers are shopping at stores for individual people. So it's something that a successful business is what creates as job security. And we believe we'll have an incredibly successful business that creates job security. And we will be, I believe, the largest retail union employer as well. And by far the majority of our competitors are non-union in today's environment.
Will you commit to maintaining neutrality if non-union employees choose to unionize?
Yeah, and we've always, we call our employees associates, and we believe it's our associates' choice in terms of what they decide to do.
And you will commit to being neutral?
And we continue to support our associates on making those decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Needler, I was particularly interested in your testimony because I know a lot of independent grocers across Connecticut, family businesses like yours, face the challenges that you've described to the committee in your testimony. And we have dominant grocery retailers in Connecticut, most often Stop and Shop and ShopRite, as well as Walmart and other big box stores that compete with independent grocers. I've heard from time to time about how the largest grocery sellers use their buyer power, in quotes, buyer power, to effectively demand special treatment, from privileged access to products to price advantages. And I know it'll be no surprise to you to hear from me, but I was surprised to learn that even before the pandemic, independent grocers sometimes resorted to buying products from Costco because it gets such steep discounts that its retail prices are actually lower than the wholesale prices that an independent grocer like you and like many in Connecticut can obtain. And I know that this problem was only exacerbated by the supply chain disruptions and shortages resulting from the pandemic. I know that you haven't taken a position. You're agnostic on the merger, so I'm not going to ask you to comment on it specifically. But in your experience, how important is it that your large competitors' size their ability, use their ability, exploit it, their buyer power to achieve special treatment? And how would you expect the combined firms' increased buying power to affect their smaller competitors in the market?
Thank you, sir, for your question. Look, we compete on service, quality, assortment, overall shopping experience, but the number one variable that a consumer has to decide on is price. And if the largest can exert so much power to get terms, conditions, in many cases, you hear that Walmart doesn't even pay for the product till it's been sold. That is the complete opposite for me. I'm paying for it at the back door in some cases, and whether it sells or not. So you have access to capital that they will have access to capital that the small independent won't get. They will have access to products in sizes and in cost that we'll never get to see. And if that is used inappropriately, ultimately the consumer will choose with their pocketbook, and that will not end well in the long term. I think if you look at it on a time continuum, what happens is that they will continue to exert the pressure for the suppliers, the CPGs. They'll get better costs and consequently be able to run more volume, and then consequently be able to run lower margins, ultimately putting that pressure on the independent who have already higher costs and lower volumes, which takes the rest of the P&L a little bit out of whack. So at the end of the day, those folks having more buyer power, if it is not controlled through transparency and enforcement of RPA, I mean, there's already guardrails there. All we're asking is, hey, let's just keep those guardrails there. If there's consolidation, fine, but let's just make sure that we all have a level playing field and say, if you're going to buy in similar quantities, and I think people ask oftentimes, what are similar quantities? Study after study show that, if you're buying in truckloads, your buying is almost as efficient for the supplier as you can. I'm supplied by 2, 3 multi-billion-dollar wholesalers that, they're buying it very efficiently. But for some reason, we're still not able to get it at the rates that some of these power buyers are.
Keep the guardrails and enforce them.
That's the idea.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Blumenthal, for your leadership in this area as well. Next up, I'm going to call on Senator Hawley, but I'd first like to enter into the record a letter, number of letters from Representatives Jayapal, Nadler, Cicilline, and Smith, as well as a letter from the United Food and Commercial Workers, as well as a white paper from the National Grocers Association. Any objections? It's so entered. Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thanks to the witnesses for being here. Mr. McMullen, Mr. Shankaran, let me start with you. In the course of preparing for this hearing, I came across a slide deck that was apparently prepared by both of your companies together. I've got it here. On one of the slides, you talk about your complementary ESG strategies, and you put this forward as a reason to move forward with the merger. Now, ESG refers to environmental, social, and governance considerations. And you talk here about your shared commitment to workforce diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's just talk about that for a second, if we could. Maybe let's start with you, Mr. McMullen. Give me your sense of what you mean by workforce inclusion. Does that include religious commitments? Are those relevant to workforce inclusion?
Yeah, when you look at our overall ESG commitments, obviously the amount of impact that we have from an energy usage standpoint is incredibly important. To have a company that's inclusive in terms of from diversity, equity, inclusion, that means including everybody. People are promoted and rewarded based on their success and ability to be a leader in the organization and contribute to the organization. And we do not make judgments on anybody in terms of any of their personal beliefs, and do not think that's appropriate either.
So that includes people of faith, I think is what you're saying.
It includes everything.
So has your company ever fired an employee or disciplined an employee for their religious beliefs?
Not that I'm aware of.
Well, that's interesting because Senator Cotton just read at some length into the record an EEOC lawsuit. That's a government lawsuit, which your company just settled after an adverse ruling by a federal district court, in which you apparently took disciplinary action to the extent of firing employees in Arkansas based on their religious beliefs. Do you think that's workplace inclusion?
Well, as I told Senator Cotton, I personally am not aware of the details of that.
How is that possible? You're being sued by the federal government. You've settled the suit, and you don't know about it?
No, I do not always know about it.
Well, that's extraordinary. Do your shareholders know about that? I mean, what else do you not know about? What about you, Mr. Shankaran? Has your company ever fired someone like Mr. McMullen's has based on their religious beliefs?
Senator, nothing that I know of. When we think about our diversity and inclusion agenda, Senator, we work in communities, we're in Chicago, we're in Alaska, we're in Montana, we're in DC, and we make sure that our stores represent the communities that we support, and we recruit from the communities to serve the communities. That's the fundamental principle of our diversity and inclusion effort.
Let me just ask you about this. Why would having complementary ESG strategies be a justification for a merger? Why would that be relevant at all?
Well, if you look at some of the things that both of us have done from Kroger's commitment to zero hunger, zero waste, and we've made the commitment, if we operate in a market, there'll be zero hunger in that market, and we'll work with everybody, and especially food banks. We've provided 2.3 billion meals. By merging with Albertsons as an example, we'll be able to have that positive impact and really further grow on what both of our companies have done individually.
Don't you think you should be asking what positive impact you're going to have on the people you serve? Like, for instance, the ability to provide food at a reasonable cost to people who need it, the ability to actually offer a product that consumers need and want. You know, here's what I find interesting. Lena Khan sat where you're sitting, she's the chairwoman of the FTC, just a few weeks ago, and she testified under oath that she's seeing an accelerating trend of companies justifying mergers on the basis of ESG, as if that should somehow allow them to evade scrutiny for the merger. She testified that she thought it had absolutely no relevance whatsoever, and I think that she is absolutely correct. The fact that you're using this as a justification for your merger, I think, frankly, is ridiculous. But maybe let's talk about one or two things that I think are relevant. What are your plans for closing stores upon the consummation of this merger? How many stores do you plan to close? Mr. McMullen, start with you.
We do not plan to close stores as part of this merger.
Zero?
Zero.
Mr. Shankaran?
Senator, as the CEO of the new company, Mr. McMullen makes those decisions, but as he said, he plans to close 0 stores.
And so you won't be shuttering them in any form, not spinning them off, not giving them away. You're going to keep everything open to your current footprint.
Yes, but we will work with the FTC in terms of divesting stores to a viable competitor, and if that's not successful, using the SpinCo structure as well.
Well, what does that mean? I mean, how many stores are you going to spin off then?
We don't know. We're in active conversations with the FTC, and as we're going through that process with the FTC, there'll be a combined agreement. There'll be an agreement with the FTC in terms of how that's handled.
How do you plan to reduce your workforce as a outcome of this merger? How many layoffs are we talking about?
We will not lay off any frontline workers as a part of this.
What does that mean? No workers?
If you look at frontline workers,
You're inserting the word frontline. Let's just stay with worker.
frontline would be warehouses, manufacturing plants, stores. There would be no layoffs.
So no layoffs at all?
No layoffs on any of those positions, sir.
Well, what positions would you consider laying off then?
Well, together we'll look at, from an administrative support standpoint, we'll look at, if you look at historically, when we've merged with the companies on Harris Teeter and Roundy's, things like that, we've ended up not laying off anybody because what we have found is the merged companies do things better than we do. And one of the key things is making sure they're finding the best of both.
Let me ask you this, Mr. McMullen, and I'm sure Senator Durbin wants to ask questions here, so I'll hand it over here in just a second. But you have, as I think you testified earlier, you conducted a stock buyback recently of I think about $1 billion. Why not give that money, pass that money along to your associates, as you say, in the form of higher wages?
Yeah, as I shared earlier, we've invested an incremental $1.2 billion in associate wages over the last 4 years.
Could have been $2 billion if you hadn't have done the stock buybacks.
We also spent over $1 billion, right at $1 billion, improving pension benefits as well. And it's really balancing all the constituents when you look at customers, associates, communities, and shareholders. Back to your earlier comments, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Next up, our patient and great leader of this committee, Chairman Durbin.
Thanks, Senator Klobuchar, and thank you to all the witnesses. I'm sorry I was late, but there's a roll call on the floor, and we're trying to balance things back and forth. Very interested in this issue, but I also want to comment on this hearing. You probably noticed a difference in political philosophy coming out in this hearing. Some of us believe that the so-called ESG, environmental concerns, concerns for diversity and the like, are really part of responsible corporate citizenship. And we believe you can be profitable in America and be respectful of your employees, regardless of their background. And you can also be profitable in America and sensitive to with the fact that we are living through climate change, and we all have to be part of the solution. So there is a difference of opinion on this side of the table I'd like to express. I'd like to ask Mr. Sharma, if I can. After all of your statements, and I've read through them, it's pretty clear to me that you don't see any redeeming feature in this merger.
Yes, I do not. It's because what the companies are doing today, they might be lowering prices, is what they're doing today. What matters is what the structure of the market will be after these companies merge. And even if they sell a few stores, it's going to take competition out of the market. So prices will go up. In fact, there's a 2012 FTC study which looked at retail mergers for grocery stores, and it said if a market is already concentrated and companies merge, prices will go up. Can I also touch on the question of wages, by the way? You know, there's wages, and there's $1 billion which the companies claim they'll pass on if they merge, if they've committed, etc. But how are these wages set by the companies? I mean, these are profit-maximizing companies. And as Kroger states in its 2021 fact book, if I might read that out, this is driven by a data analytics research for specific areas to ensure our wages are competitive with the market. So if there are fewer stores in an area, it would seem to me they would face less competition to hire people. So they might actually reduce wages. So this is, you know, it's completely at odds at how they actually do business.
So the lack of competition does not benefit the consumer. Prices are likely to go up. And the elimination of some stores, it's debatable as to how many and how soon, would mean fewer opportunities to shop, which means at least some inconvenience, if not more. I think of Mr. McMullen, I think of my hometown of East St. Louis, Illinois. Kroger has been in that area for a long time. And I think of the efforts that I put in, and a lot have joined me, to try to reestablish a grocery store in a town of 20,000 people. National was there for a while, pulled out. And it is a battle. I have it all over my state, in rural areas and in inner city areas. How can this help these communities by having fewer stores?
Senator, thank you for the question. And first, thank you for all your support of organized retail crime. It's a huge help, so I just wanted to mention that. When you look at
my support in stopping organized retail.
Yes, I was going to step in as chair and clarify. Thank you, Senator.
Very much accepted as the modification. Totally agree, Senator. If you look at across the country, for us, our vision is to serve America. And when we look at serving America, that's every community. And every community is important to us. And today, we're fortunate to be able to do that. That's part of the fun part of our business. Both of us, three of us, enjoy serving rural communities, inner city communities, other parts of the communities. And when you look at, from a combined basis, it'll allow us to create certain economic advantages from a technology standpoint in terms of today, point-of-sale equipment, both point-of-sale systems. We both have teams. Well, obviously, you would only need one team from a technology standpoint. And those things will allow us to leverage what we would call a seamless shopping experience as well.
What I'm getting to is, maybe I'm challenging you to think, if you're envisioning the future of markets, supermarkets, to consider what's going on in rural America and inner cities. The markets are closing, but dollar stores are opening. And sadly, the groceries that are available to people in those dollar stores are limited, expensive, and really don't embrace things like fresh produce very often. I've talked to some of the leaders in the grocery business saying, can you imagine a model where dollar store offered something that was reasonable for food pricing in a rural area or a small town area? Could that work? Do you think of those things?
Absolutely. From the people that we compete against, we would look at dollar stores, Walmart, Costco. If you look at rural communities, we would look at, we're testing a couple of smaller stores. We're also testing what we call hometown, where it's using our delivery infrastructure where somebody can pick up at their local community. We're testing several different areas because we think it's a business opportunity that the dollar stores principally get. We're trying several different approaches to that.
I sure hope you do, because it's desperately needed in these towns with dwindling populations and in the inner city areas. And I worry that the merger is going to just consolidate the operations to the point where there's not a chance for these towns in the future.
Yeah, Senator, I appreciate the comment. If you look at Dollar General example, they have 18,000 locations. We see that as a business opportunity in terms of serving where they serve. And for us, fresh is one of our differences on go-to-market. And it's something that we believe is an opportunity, and we're testing things to try. So thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And while we were all glued to this hearing, I would like to report that the U.S. World Cup team defeated Iran. So there we are. Something we can all agree on. Okay, next up, Senator Black.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. McMullen, thank you for mentioning one of my home state companies, Dollar General. You do find them across the country, and I would say they are probably a very worthy competitor to you all. They have found a successful model. Mr. Needler, let me come to you. I think you've probably been listening with great interest to some of the answers to these questions. I recently visited with some independent grocers in Tennessee to walk through a store, see what the problems are, and these food deserts that would exist. It is independent grocers that are filling those, and competition is an important part of that. Do you want to just very quickly, because time is short, weigh in on any comment about how negatively or positively that a merger of this type would affect you all?
Look, I think we've been pretty clear on the record that we want to make sure that there are guardrails in place to make sure that people of our size can buy groceries, get access to those groceries on a fair and consistent playing field. And if we can ensure that that happens, then we can compete on location, experience, quality, so on and so forth.
And service.
And service, of course. So to the extent that this merger occurs, and we're talking about specific markets, like LA and these other areas, it's less impact on your district. But I think it's just important that we look at this whole thing and think, do we have a level playing field first? Are the guardrails that are in place being enforced? And how do we make sure that the little guy can fight the fight? We're not asking for a handout. We're not asking for favor. We're not asking for anything to that extent. We just want a fair shake and the right
A
opportunity.
level playing field.
Yep.
And access to the same pricing in spite of all the supply chains issues that have been in front of these. Mr. McMullen, let me come to you. I want to go back to something that you said about the $500 million commitment to lower prices. So let's talk about the Kroger customer. And you can use paper coupons or digital coupons. You've talked about personalizing the grocery buying experience to the basket of groceries that customer buys. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and the primary reason people shop at Kroger would be lower prices, convenience?
What our customers tell us is a combination of pricing promotions, fresh product that lasts when they get it home. Our associates and
Shelf life, yes.
When it gets home.
Right.
Our associates, and that we call employees associates in terms of the friendliness, how long does it take to check out?
All right, so you're looking to personalize that. That means you're going to have data collection that you're going to be focused on, correct?
Correct, we do.
Okay, and then how do you hold that data?
We hold it internally within the company. We never share individual household data outside of the company. Somebody can get...
You don't share it with vendors?
Not on an individual basis.
No, that's not what I asked. Do you share
we would
that
do
data collectively?
On an anonymized basis.
Okay, that is sharing that data.
A customer can get the values from a discount standpoint without giving any personal data. They can get it.
Okay, when you put your grocery order in, and then it comes up, 2 for $4 or 2 for $5 when you're looking at different items. That is pretty personalized, and that is your goal. So let's be consistent. You're using the retail markets network, and you're collecting this data. You're holding this data. You are saying you anonymize the data, but we all know that is specific to an IP address. So we'll put that in the record for consistency on this. Now let me ask you this. Out of that $500 million commitment that you've made to lower prices, is that going to be used to offset the cost of paper and digital coupons? Is it going to be part of your consideration of paying for the data in order to collect and hold and monetize that data, which is what Kroger does with that?
Well, the $500 million is a commitment for reduced pricing to the Albertsons customer.
I'm trying to get you, and you can submit this to me in writing. What is the manner in which you are going to compensate the consumer for those lower prices? Is it going to be across the board? Is it going to be specific to that customer in that personalized shopping experience? And what kind of guarantee are you giving them on that data being held without that data being shared to vendors? And so I'm out of time, so we'll let you submit that to me for the record. And I have one other question on ESG, but I will submit that as a written request.
Okay. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackburn. So I guess I'll start with you, Mr. Sharma. You've heard the CEOs explain how they think this merger will result in better stores, lower prices. What's your reaction to that? And in your experience, how often do mergers like this one that's proposed result in tangible benefits for consumers? What risk factors do you see?
So I think we have clear empirical evidence that if there are mergers in already concentrated industries, that will lead to an increase in prices. And there's an FTC study which looked at retail mergers. It found that would be the case. As I've also pointed out in my testimony, what matters is that these companies compete head-to-head with each other in so many of their big markets. Out of 5 out of 10 of the most profitable Kroger markets, Albertson is listed by Kroger as one of its competitors. So that competition is going to go away. And that will result in higher prices, poor store quality, et cetera, et cetera. There'll just be less, even if they spin it off, it's not going to have the same competitive impact. Looking at this $500 million that the companies say they'll pass on. So first of all, let's be clear, and the companies accept this in their investor presentation, this is not a given that they will save $500 million. This is what they expect to do. There's some uncertainty. So that's an important point to keep in mind. The loss in competition is certain. These expected efficiencies are uncertain. It's over a 4-year period. It's a one-time cost saving. So I'm not sure how that would affect prices going forward when there will be less competition. So I'll say that to you. I think that's a lot.
Okay. All right. You're not going to take up all your time like a senator would do. All right. Thank you. Mr. McMullen said that the combined company expects to invest $1 billion to raise wages and benefits for store employees. And Mr. Shankaran, can you make the same commitment at stores that are spun off related to the proposed transaction?
Senator, to the extent it is part of SpinCo, we will continue to pay competitive wages. We've got a history as a company of raising wages every year over the last several years since the merger with Safeway. Those principles will remain because that's how we celebrate our workforce. There are going to be stores that are divested that are not part of our SpinCo, will be divested to other buyers who are hopefully credible buyers. I cannot make commitments for them, Senator.
Okay. I'm going to get at something that Mr. Needler was raising about buying power and the like. And you've said, I think both of you, that part of the justification of the merger is that your combined scale will allow you to get better prices from suppliers, something in raising the sphere of Walmart. So, Mr. Shankaran, you used to be the leader at PepsiCo, and does PepsiCo give better pricing in other terms to the largest grocers?
Senator, I was on the supplier side for 10 years. I was also the chairman of the Consumer Brands Association, which had many, many different manufacturers in it. Muscle from retailers works for a short period of time. Manufacturers and suppliers always find a way around it. Manufacturers and suppliers always support retailers that grow their business and make their business more efficient. That's the principle. In the long run, that is always what happens. We are a business that's growing and driving more efficiencies with suppliers. Kroger is a business that's growing and driving more efficiencies with suppliers. I think in combination, we'll be able to do even more to increase the utilization of a factory, to get more utilization of a transport, to increase the productivity of a farmer. And all of those costs, we believe, will be passed to the customer. That's the power of bringing these companies together in creating more value for our customers.
Mr. Needler, do you want to comment on the buying power issue?
I think his point was that in the short term, they figure a way around it. And I think of it like a waterbed. They figure a way around it for their shareholders, because as the big retailers push down on them on price, they have to raise it somewhere else. We have the same amount of water in the bed, but ultimately the rural communities and the small players have to pay more for that short term while they figure it out. PepsiCo did mention, I think, in their last or one of their filings, that there is buyer power and they're concerned about it. It is a real thing that we need to open our eyes to, and I think that increasing transparency, increasing a level playing field will allow for a lot more diversity in the food supply chain and a lot more options for the consumer, which I think Mr. Sharma is advocating for.
Okay. So you said, Mr. McMullen, that you plan to divest somewhere between 100 to 375 stores. How did you arrive at those numbers? Did you look at how many of your stores are within a certain mileage radius of each other? Have you assessed how many communities would see their grocery store options reduced from 2 stores to 1 store? Because it's a big range, and so we're trying to figure out how you arrived at it and how you will determine the final number of stores.
Thank you, Senator, for the question. If you look, we have professional advisors that have looked at it market by market, and it's the best estimate at this time. Now, obviously, we will continue to work with the FTC, and that alignment with the FTC will determine the ultimate number of stores that are divested.
So, Professor Sweeting, you wrote in your testimony that data on what different grocery chains customers can go to can be useful to antitrust enforcers, but that data can produce misleading results, and you said you often visit both Safeway and Whole Foods, but it doesn't necessarily suggest you would switch more spending to Whole Foods if Safeway prices went up. Would you please explain why data about what stores customers visit might not best predict how they would react to price increases, customers?
Sure. Thank you for the question. So the point I was trying to make in my written testimony was that obviously, as has been discussed, there's lots of reasons why people visit different stores. It could be interest in the particular kind of fresh assortments they have at Whole Foods. It could be in the particular store brands you get at Whole Foods. But I myself buy kind of a lot of staples at Safeway. And obviously, if the price of those staples went up, I might be much more likely to switch to a rival chain that also supplies a similar set of staple products. So in my case, that could be my local Harris Teeter store, rather than switching some of that expenditure away from the kind of standard consumer brand staples to what Whole Foods sells. Right? So that's the kind of reason why you really have to understand how consumers are going to respond to a particular price increase. And the point I was trying to make is that, surveys which ask consumers exactly that question can be one way to try and get at a more accurate answer.
Okay. Just a number of questions that are somewhat unrelated, but I think important to ask. I'll go back to you, Professor Sweeting. You have studied the impacts of mergers on prices and found that while some companies are able to find efficiencies after a merger, those savings are not typically passed on to the consumer, something I just asked Mr. Sharma about. Are you concerned that this merger will fail to lead to lower prices? And are there any tools available to antitrust enforcers that can be used to ensure that transactions like this one develop the benefits to customers?
Okay, so there's quite a few questions there, so
Yes, I know.
I will try to unpack them a little bit. So, the key thing economists do, including those at the agencies, when they assess a merger, is they're going to try and look at what is going to go on with the long-run incentives that the companies have to lower prices and expand output and offer better quality and service. So what that usually does involve an assessment of, are these efficiencies really likely to be realized? Are they ones that cannot be realized through other means? And are they really going to affect a firm's incentives on the margin in the sense of being things that really reduce marginal costs and incentivize a firm to grow output? If those efficiencies are there, then we understand it could be possible that that's going to offset some of the anti-competitive incentives that will be created by the reduced number of competitors. And therefore, it depends on how much of those lower marginal cost efficiencies are going to be passed through. So I have some research, as you referenced, that presents some assumptions under which the degree of pass-through of efficiencies will be lower than the standard models which agencies use to assess mergers would predict. And from that point of view, of course, while I would tend to be more concerned than some other people might be about whether the benefits of the merger are going to be passed through to consumers. But it's also important to realize that those models rely on some very kind of specific assumptions. So in particular, it depends on rival firms having imperfect information about how large the efficiencies are that are going to be realized. And then it also depends on the fact that the merged firm would believe that if they lower prices, rivals are going to respond by cutting their prices significantly. And that's going to be much more true when markets are already concentrated and when rivals' markups are already fairly large. So obviously this could, as Mr. Sharma suggested, explain some of the results that we have that grocery store prices have tended to go up quite a lot after mergers in already concentrated markets. But on the other hand, this is obviously a very kind of fact-specific question, and I don't know, how large rivals' margins are. I don't know exactly what rivals could expect or not expect after this merger. So I would say these raises possible concerns, but they don't necessarily tell you whether the FTC should block this particular transaction. Now, you also asked about the tools that are available to agencies to try and make sure consumers benefit. Obviously, some of the remedies that are available are more kinds of behavioral remedies, right? So one might view some of the kind of commitments that the parties are making as sounding a bit like some of the behavioral remedies to say we are going to pass some of these benefits through. On the other hand, enforcers are, for good reasons, fairly skeptical about the value of behavioral remedies in transactions because they understand that, behavioral remedies don't change long-run incentives, and it's very hard to know if prices go down, what's going on with quality and service, for example, is that being flexed in another direction. So I think for that reason, the preference the agencies have for going for structural remedies, which will really preserve incentives to compete in the local markets that we talked about, are the right way to focus. But obviously what's important is additional to thinking about kind of the number of stores is also to think about the viability of the divested business, making sure it has, the distribution centers, the private labels, the data, and the financial resources to actually compete in the market.
So we don't have a repeat of what happened in the last one.
Yep.
All right. One last question, then I'm going to turn over to Senator Lee, and I'll go vote, come back, because we have a seamless merger in our chairmanship of this committee. I brought up when I was talking to Mr. Needler, you've missed some very incredible analogies Mr. Needler has shared, including one about a waterbed that you may want to ask about that I thoroughly enjoyed. Professor Sweeting, you have talked about in your written testimony about the importance of our resources, given what we are up against, whether it is the tech companies. Senator Lee has done a lot of work with respect to Google, whether it is, as I mentioned, the Ticketmaster situation. And these agencies are basically a bit of a shadow of what they were even under Richard Nixon. Yet the consolidation and the companies have grown to some of the biggest companies the world has ever known. And so taking it out of this discussion about this particular merger right now, we have this golden opportunity on a bipartisan bill, which includes Senator Lee's work, to actually get some much-needed resources. Could you talk about the importance of doing that instead of just having these hearings, which are very, very important to give the information to the agencies and for us to shape legislation, but the key importance of giving the enforcers the resources they need to shape what you have been talking about, which is either guardrails, or it is enforcement of consent decrees, or it is a denial of petitions if they don't have the resources to do it.
Sure. So additional funding for the agencies, I think, will be used in a number of very productive ways. So obviously I talked about, surveys as being one type of, tool you can actually use within investigations that can lead to better assessments, but are very expensive to conduct. So those kind of tools would become available. But what I would really like to highlight is probably the fact there is a very strong complementarity between research activities that the agencies can conduct and investigation outcomes, right? So actually, antitrust enforcers have done research actually referring to a waterbed effect, like Mr. Needler
I thought he just made it up on the spot.
Right. So, but this is actually, so Thomas Valetti, who was EC, competition chief economist, he's written a paper about this very topic. And, it is actually that kind of research that's done by enforcers thinking about these real world issues that not only makes for good research, but can also drive investigation. So I mentioned the UK analysis of Asda and Sainsbury's. The waterbed effect was specifically something they thought about, both to understand the effect on smaller, more independent grocery chains, but also on the effects of on suppliers and the ability of suppliers to come up with kind of new products that consumers want. Now, in the specific case, the CMA ended up deciding that even though they believed that that transaction was bad for other reasons, that actually the waterbed effect was not something that was going to be a significant result of that transaction. And that's a result of, fact-specific investigations. What I would also say is, one important value of funding for the agencies is the fact they will have the ability to be able to go to court if they need to without possibly sacrificing kind of other priorities. Right. So when I was at the FTC, we often had to discuss kind of the resource constraint that affected the ability of the agencies to potentially use its own expert on cases to reduce costs, because if we were to do that, we would have to pull people off other investigations. So I think it is super important to add resources.
All right. Want to add anything, Mr. Needler?
I mean, I think that one thing that I've done a lot of transactions where I've bought small stores, I bought other little companies. In my experience, it does translate to a better experience for the acquisition and the merger that I created did translate for better consumer outcomes. In this case, Mr. McMullen has done a big transaction recently that I can think of with Harris Teeter, and I think his behavior there shared a good, positive outcome for the consumer. I think to speak only in hypotheticals and in research papers, which I didn't read, by the way, is unfair. I think you should look at somebody's past behavior and see how they behaved. So you have to decide what's leadership saying, what have they done in the past, and what is the best guide to see what will happen in the future.
But you're a big believer in having these guardrails and enforcing.
Oh, sure. Those are two separate topics. I think they are two separate topics. What they do, market to market, is one separate topic, and what pressure they can apply to the CPGs, and they probably will and already do. This will just exacerbate it. And then when you look at the specific markets, corner to corner, picking the right stores, you can't look at a broad spreadsheet and say, yeah, it seems to make sense. You got to go like,
in the market.
All right, so which corner should Kroger keep and which corner should Spinco keep? And how are they making that choice? And probably Kroger will want to keep this one. And it might be a tough choice for the FTC to say, not so fast. I think that one is a better store. They might, to preserve the competition, might need to have that. So I think there's going to be...
you're saying in the world you live in, it's market to market, which is why it's our complex analysis.
It's not going to be done on a spreadsheet, and it's not going to be done in a study.
Okay. You agree, Mr. Sharma?
I agree, yeah. And I was saying, also looking at real-world facts, you can see what the company's been saying pre-merger and the activities and the services it's been providing pre-merger, and the one it claims it can do post-merger. So if you look at data, Kroger already has data on 60 million households. Post-merger, it will have data on 85 million households. So but there's no evidence to suggest that that additional 25 million households will help personalize services any better. But that is one of the claims that they make. How they get better, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
All right, I'm going to go vote. Turn over Senator Lee. I won't have many questions when I come back, and you two may want to respond to some of the questions I asked. So go ahead, Senator Lee.
Thanks so much. Mr. Needler, unlike a lot of progressive antitrust reformers,
You're really doing this when I'm leaving?
well,
no, continue on. I'll get a report.
I'll take notes for you. I still believe that that scale and efficiency can be a good thing insofar as they deliver lower prices to consumers, and sometimes they can have that effect. That said, if those lower prices that can result from that scale and efficiency end up just being transferred to someone else because of the increased buying power that the transaction creates, you can end up just still creating significant competition concerns as a result of that, with those costs shifting somewhere else. I missed the waterbed discussion. I assume that's what you were talking about with the waterbed effect. Is that right?
You just described it.
Oh, excellent, excellent. So if I understand it correctly, then this idea is that in some of these transactions, you're just shifting it, and the merged entity that's much bigger has a whole lot more scale and consequently can command bigger discounts and lower prices for what it buys from suppliers. But then other people, other competitors that don't benefit from that increased buying power due to scale, the customers of that competitor end up paying higher prices. Now, this becomes especially concerning when you look at the distribution of grocery stores. My own anecdotal evidence on this, which seems to be consistent with what I've looked at empirically, what little I've looked at, is that large grocery store chains tend to be far more prevalent in densely populated areas of the United States than they are in more rural places. My dad grew up in a tiny town called St. John's, Arizona. His parents had a grocery store. They were in the business and almost until their deaths in their 80s in this tiny town. It's not the kind of place where you expect to see a Walmart, where back in the day you would have seen a Safeway, or today, an Albertsons or a Kroger. That's where you tend to see the more independent stores. And so with a transaction like this, could one argue that the net effect of this could be, among other things, higher prices for the customers of the more rural stores and other independents relative to prices paid in more heavily populated areas?
Yes, that's the exact argument that I'm making, and that's what we're trying to say. There is a law in the books that would just say, hey, look, if your parents would have been able to buy from a wholesaler who's buying in similar quantities, in truckload quantities, they should be entitled to that opportunity to fight and compete with that same cost. Obviously, cost has a lot of factors to it, and it's not just list price on the box of Cheerios. It's the promotions, the frequency in which those promotions or discounts have been given by the manufacturer. It's marketing money that is kind of below the line. They talk about it as alt revenue, but it's ultimately CPGs paying for the access to sell more products in their stores, which is ultimately a net reduction in cost of goods, further exacerbating this waterbed effect as we keep talking about. So there is that potential. I'm not suggesting that these folks were going to do this on purpose. It just happens, and they're probably reacting to the one player or two players who are already doing it, or three players. I mean, obviously, Walmart has this power. There's already an elephant on the waterbed. They're just trying to hop on each other's back to move the water a little more in their favor. But if we could try to put those guardrails out there, and if we could try to level the playing field and enforce it and say, hey, look, we want a fair shake for a broad spectrum of retailers, then mergers like this become less consequential. Scale will still occur through operating leverage, will still occur through know-how and technology and culture and capital. Those things are all still going to exist. But when we get down to the raw cost of goods, which is our biggest line, I mean, this is the one we want to make sure at least we have parity on.
Right. Is there a way to mitigate against the waterbed effect in a transaction like this one? Well, because you've acknowledged that there can be economies of scale.
It's less about this transaction, sir. It's more about just overall oversight on a rule that's on your books. So either two ways to do it. You can dust off the rule and say, does this rule that's quite old apply to today's standards, and should it? And then do we need to rearm it with the proper tools to be enforceable? Or two, provide more resources to the FTC to try to look into this allegation that I make. And it's not a secret that these rural communities are losing their fresh food conventional grocery stores. It's been discussed quite a bit today. The dollar stores have similar products to us, but not the same. So I sell 100 ounces of Tide, they sell 75. Well, I can't buy the 75. I'm using this as an example. Well, the consumer sees a lower price. I say, well, fine, well, let me have the 75. They might be paying more per ounce on that 75 than I'm selling my 100, but at the end of the day, I would like the ability to get that same product or the club pack product. There are things that are happening that just doesn't seem like the odds are stacked in favor of the little guy.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McMullen, let's get back to you. Even if the spun-off company is competently run, it'll be a tiny entity compared to the other players in the market. Kroger and Albertsons have said that their merger is necessary in order to better compete with Walmart. Is that right?
Yes.
And if Kroger and Albertsons, which each have over 2,000 stores currently, if they can't compete with Walmart, then how would the spun-off company survive with only a few hundred stores dispersed throughout the country?
Thank you for the question, Senator. I think part of it gets back to what Mr. Needler said in terms of really connecting with the local community, and it's a combination of price, service, and freshness. There's several competitors that would be actually smaller than what Spinco would be when you look at Weiss Markets, Ingalls, companies like that across the country. And I know personally when I do store visits, I will go into smaller chains just as often as I go into bigger chains because I find the smaller chains are incredibly innovative with new ideas, new products. And even if you look at the National Grocers Association, one of the comments they made over the last 10 years, the market share for that industry has for the national grocers have increased from 25% to 33%.
The market share for
small regional players.
You're talking about an entity like Associated Food Stores
yes,
in Utah, for
yes,
example.
Okay. Yeah, and you're
a great company.
Yes,
toured their warehouse.
Yeah, incredible company, incredible competitor. They have some amazing local chains, as you know, that offer incredibly fresh product. And what we look at is the customer really doesn't look at the size of the company; they look at the experience. And those companies are able to leverage, suppliers, and your example of Associated Grocers and Affiliated and Wakefern and others, to get the same economic leverage from a cost standpoint that we would have as well.
Okay. But if those other smaller players are going to be fine, doesn't that undercut the justification for the merger, for your merger?
Yeah, if you look in terms of the way we look at consumer product goods companies, we really look at everything as a partnership and how do we work together to reduce or combine costs. And then when you look at those efficiencies, passing those on to our customers, passing along to our associates and wages and things. So for the model in which we've operated, we have found that works very successful, and I love the questions around how do we know going forward. And the only way I know how to answer is to actually give real examples of what we've actually done in the past.
Okay, Dr. Sweeting, I'm concerned that continued consolidation in the grocery industry could increase the likelihood of coordinated pricing behavior. Because after all, the more consolidation there is, the easier it is to have some type of coordinated pricing behavior, regardless of the level of formality, discernibility, or discoverability attached to it. Do you see this as a possibility, and how do you think enforcers can assess that concern?
So, thank you, Senator. So you're absolutely right. When economists think about mergers, they typically think about two types of effects. So unilateral effects, where there's no coordination, but then the possibility that on top of unilateral incentives to raise prices, there could also be these things that result from some type of, from the firms understanding their mutual independence of their actions that could lead to some kind of coordination on, price choices or some kind of innovation choice. So obviously within groceries, I mentioned the UK CMA report where they looked at a number of questions, including coordinated effects. So obviously, once again, it's a very fact-specific investigation to understand how these choices are made. What the view they took that was within kind of local in-store groceries, there wasn't much evidence either of pre-merger coordination or that the merger was likely to increase the degree of coordination, which obviously is kind of the key question the FTC will be addressing. As I mentioned, within the online channel, the kind of delivered grocery channel, they actually viewed the possibility of coordinated effects after the merger as being significantly greater, partly because you have these fees for delivery, delivery or for delivery passes, or how many, how big the time slot you have to sign up for could be, where they actually thought there was a greater degree of potential for coordination after the merger, even if there wasn't coordination before the proposed transaction.
That makes sense. Mr. Sharma, should we be concerned at all about the possibility that further consolidation in the grocery industry could lead to additional consolidation among grocery store suppliers?
Yes, thank you for the question. So can I just go back to the coordination point? And it links to your answer there, because we've heard from Mr. Needler how the biggest players like Walmart can impose these terms and conditions which are favorable to themselves but not to suppliers. And the two companies, when they merge, will be more like Walmart. So it'll be more easier for them to impose similar conditions as well. Whereas today, they're two separate companies. Walmart is a completely different size, so it can impose these conditions. After the merger, these guys will be about the same size, so they can easily, what's the word you use, mutually come to a mutual understanding and have similar conditions, which would then...
Mutual understanding there being euphemism?
Yeah, for example, have similar conditions for suppliers, similarly onerous conditions for suppliers, not just in pricing, but also conditions for suppliers. And that could then lead to the suppliers saying, hey, we need to also consolidate so that we can bargain better with these two big players now. Earlier we had more choices, now we don't. So yes, to answer your question, yes.
To what extent does that additional consolidation produce efficiencies that can contribute favorably to consumer welfare?
So the important point here is, will that be passed on to consumers, right? So you can have efficiencies, you can have cost savings due to consolidation. But then if there isn't the competitive pressure in the market, then those cost savings go to your bottom line. Your prices don't come down. I mean, these companies are profit-maximizing companies. They'll keep that money. So they might benefit, but I'm not sure consumers will.
Right. Now, when grocery stores combine, we usually talk about local markets and about consumer prices, but the merger would also combine two large retail media networks. And, of course, for those who aren't familiar with what that means, the retail media network is I think it's safe to describe it as the retail advertising arm of a retail store. Is that right? So, for example, grocery stores use their customer loyalty programs to collect data on customers, on their consumers, on what they buy, when they buy it, and what quantities they buy it, where they live, how much they spend, how they pay, and how those factors change over time. And sometimes they combine that data that they collect with additional data that's available for purchase through data brokers on an open market. They then use that data to market, to sell things to their own customers through promotions, through advertisements, and pricing decisions. Being two of the largest grocery store chains in the country, Kroger and Albertsons, when combined, would likely form one of the very largest grocery retail media networks. Now, maybe I should direct this to you, Mr. McMullen. Should consumers be worried about encroachments on their privacy, and should advertisers be worried about higher prices?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. And when you look at retail media, our biggest competitor in that space is Google, Facebook, and Walmart and Amazon. We use that, we personalize the experience, so we're actually looking at what we are using and believing the customer would have an interest in and showing the customer that type of item. The CPG would never know that customer on an individual basis. It would only be through directly from Kroger in terms of what that person sees. We would never, ever share that individual person outside of the Kroger network.
Mr. Sharma, what's your response to the same question?
So let me just start off by saying that I think consumers and citizens are increasingly concerned about the data collection that goes on, not just by these companies, but also the Googles and Facebooks. But I think that's a separate question, and we probably need to make a plug here for data privacy, a federal data privacy act to resolve that issue. I think what's pertinent here is that what are the companies able to do today, and what are the benefits they might get if they combine? So they already have data on 60 million households, Kroger does. They use that to personalize, to give these personalized offers, give them coupons. They'll get data on another 25 million households. Plus, as you mentioned, they can already buy data from data brokers. So there are no efficiencies and no benefits of combining when you look at data, in my view.
Thank you.
Thank you for filibustering until I return, Senator Lee.
That was not a filibuster. I could go on for another half hour.
Oh, I have a feeling that might be true. I want to thank these witnesses. It has been a really good hearing, and I appreciate the ease in which we were able to schedule it, which means that the companies were willing to work with us on scheduling it so we could get the information that we need to make I would say, decisions ourselves, including in the next few weeks. I'm not going to keep harping on this, but on the bill that I think would be helpful to the agencies, decisions that we have with regard to legislation in the coming year, decisions that the agencies are going to make and giving them the information that they need. And I want to say one thing I wanted to clarify to Mr. McMullen and Mr. Shankaran, that I didn't agree with the comments of some of our colleagues about your inclusion policies. We discussed workforce issues at length in terms of the importance of diversity in the workforce, the importance of trying to recruit new employees. I know Mr. Needler knows this in a really hard economic environment. The solution of some immigration reform, which certainly was not the topic of this hearing, about how helpful that would be. You told your own story, Mr. Shakaran, which I appreciated, and how important that would be in terms of actually, I think, helping us with our competitive situation across the country. We've also discussed the importance of unions and workers and benefits and the like. So this discussion has gone beyond in some good ways and in my mind some bad ways where we started, but I think it's really important that we keep our eye on what this is. And I have heard about both of you in my home state, as Mr. Needler has said, from competitors of yours that they respect you both. But I think our concerns are more about just how this market is structured in terms of what's going to happen in the future. That's why we have these agencies. That's why we have to make sure we have all the facts when it comes to a highly concentrated situation more and more with the grocery market, so that Mr. Needler can continue to compete in that market, whether it is about market share, and that we know not one size fits all, that this isn't just about national data. This is about individual markets, as Professor Sweeting was talking about and Mr. Sharma. It's about what's in each community in terms of, is there really competition? And certainly the issue of the past informs us with what happened when there were spinoffs in the past that did not go well for those communities or those employees. So those are the things that we're considering and looking at as we go forward. And I did want to note, Senator Lee, that the progressive movement in antitrust was actually dominated by Republicans way back with President Theodore Roosevelt, who literally rode the antitrust course into the White House. Senator Sherman of the Sherman Act was a close confidant of President Lincoln and a Republican. And I think a lot of this, which I know you get, goes to this idea of having a strong capitalist economy. And to do that, you have to have antitrust, because as Adam Smith said, the person many relied on at the founding of our country as an economist, that he believed in the free market, but you always have to watch out for the standing army of monopolies. And so that is why we have antitrust laws, and I know you know that. You're an expert on this, as are many members of this committee, but it's also why we have to have strong enforcement. So I want to thank all our witnesses. Did you want to respond, Senator? You look like you want to respond to that.
Me?
Yeah, you, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, Adam Smith, wasn't he the author of The Invisible Waterbed?
All right. With that, we are going to keep the record open for 1 week. I want to thank our staff members who are here, Mark and Avery and Kagan on my staff, as well as Senator Lee's staff. You want to mention anyone?
Yeah, Mark Metter and Wendy Begg have done great work on this.
For their work on the hearing, as well as Senator Durbin and Senator Grassley and their staff for allowing us to move forward with this strong subcommittee. We have a feeling there's going to be more work for this subcommittee in the coming year. And we thank you so much for coming to testify today. The hearing is concluded. Thank you.